April the 30th, bees. Late April is a good time to start looking for different kinds of bee, of which there are many more than you might expect. Over 80 different species have been recorded, even in central London. Some new bees are now emerging from tiny round holes in the ground, and many more will be emerging in the next few weeks. These holes are usually the entrances of small burrows where an egg or eggs were laid perhaps last year with enough pollen and honey to allow their development into adults that we now see emerging. There are quite a number of different English names given to bees. In London, there are bumble, mining, mason, flower, potter, lawn, sweat, leafcutter, carder, yellow-faced, homeless, nomad, cuckoo, and carpenter bees. Although many are now impossible to identify accurately in the field, it is often quite possible to make a few educated guesses as to what group the bee may belong. The first thing to do when you see a bee is to make a note of its size, colour, hairiness, whether it has any bands of colour, what habitat you're in, and possibly what flowers it is visiting. It is also worth checking whether or not it has pollen baskets. These are the hairs on its legs where it collects pollen to feed its young, and they are often full of bright orange or yellow pollen. All bees collect nectar and most collect pollen, which is why they visit our gardens of flower-rich meadows. However, others prefer open, sandy areas, heaths, and even that most curious of habitats, well-trodden paths. The most familiar of all bees is the honeybee, Apis mellifera, which is a good place to start as so many other bees are similar with just slight differences. Any queens will not be seen as they are in hives uh, or cavities in trees laying eggs, and it is too early to see any drones. The workers, of which there could be several thousand, are generally golden brown with some white hairs, have a definite waist, some faint banding, and a slightly roundish pointed tail. Bumblebees, or humblebees, as they used to be called, are the ones most associated with early spring. These are usually large, very hairy, without a waist, and often with distinct bands of colour. They produce workers like honeybees, but far less, perhaps just a few hundred. Even so, it is all these workers produced by these colonial bees that account for most that we notice, as our other bees produce far less offspring. There are in the region of 20 different bumblebees in London, but only 5 or 6 that you tend to see more commonly. We can now add 3 more to those already mentioned. The brown carder bee, Bombus pascorum, is completely ginger brown with no other banding. Carder bees get their name from the way they use their jaws to carder dried moss and grasses to construct their nests, which can look like miniature birds' nests. A larger red-tailed bumblebee than the one we saw last month could well be Bombus lapidarius. It is very black and shiny with a reddish-brown tail. Almost all black bee at this time could be the flower bee, Anthophora plumipes, especially if it seems to have orange legs. It tends to be quicker than other bees than we have seen, buzzes at a higher pitch, and as its name suggests, hovers around flowers, especially tubular ones, in our gardens. There are over 200 different solitary bees in Britain, and although many are declining, a good proportion of them have been recorded on Mitcham Common. They generally lay their eggs singly or on a reserve of pollen and honey that they have collected and then deposited down some kind of burrow. They then just leave their offspring to develop. They repeat this process perhaps in the same burrow or several different places, and after doing so, often just die. We tend to notice many of them entering or leaving these tiny holes in sandy banks, which are the entrances to their burrows. This behaviour is typical of mining bees, Andrena species, of which there are over 60 different species on Mitcham Common. They tend to be small bees whose stings in some cases cannot even penetrate our skin. They have, as a rule, hairy thoraxes and less hairy abdomens, which vary in colour from red to brown and occasionally are black. If they burrow into lawns, they're often referred to as lawn bees. Here they leave small, telltale mounds of earth where they have been burrowing, and one species that tends to get noticed more than most is the large, hairy, fox-red tawny mining bee, Andrena fulva. Other groups of bees seen in more flower-rich meadows are the sweat bees, Halictus and Lasiagrossum species. They tend to be medium-sized brown or black, often with some blue or metallic coloration. Some are semi-social, with several females sharing the same burrow, with just one bee acting as a guard at the entrance, moving to one side to let the others in and out. Digger bees are also burrowing to open ground, but are far more like bumblebees. They construct small pots, they fill with honey and then lay an egg floating on the top. Potter's bees do the same. Various other bees are attracted to masonry to rear their families. The plaster bees, Coletes, are one such group noted for their hairy heads. They have no pollen baskets, as unusually they carry their nectar in their crops. Sometimes small bubbles of nectar can be seen on their faces. Yellow-faced bees are closely related but tend to be very dark in colour without markings, except for distinctive yellow or pale faces, and perhaps a few palish bands on their abdomen. Mason bees, Osmia species, also nest in holes in walls, as you might expect. Osmia rufa is a ginger red, rather solid-looking bee, but others have metallic colours and smoky wings. A number are attracted to gardens by our bee hotels, made of sections of bamboo, but others are known to nest in keyholes, bramble stems, and even snail shells. Another group more typical of meadows are the flower bees. These tend to be stout and easily confused with small bumblebees. Leaf-cutting bees, Melachalia species, cut neat discs out of rose, lilac, and willow leaves. These they then roll up and push down their burrow, one after the other, each rolled leaf containing an egg and some food. The female then sometimes sits at the entrance of her burrow, biting anything that tries to enter it. Leaf cutters as a group tend to be solid-looking, sometimes with yellow markings, and wide heads. Any bee we see collecting downy material to line its nest, from the leaves of mullins or lambsia, Stachys lanata, is likely to be a carder bee. They are often totally brown, but do sometimes look greyish or reddish. The common carder bee, Bombus pascorum, is a smallish bumblebee with a noticeably hairy reddish thorax. It is the only bumblebee in London to have a reddish thorax. Bees that burrow into old or dead wood were all generally in the past referred to as carpenter bees. Some pick the old unused burrows of other creatures, and others prefer to excavate their own. Sometimes small amounts of sawdust near the entrances testify to their activities. Nowadays, the word carpenter is largely used to describe Xylocarpa species, which includes the never-to-be-forgotten gigantic cobalt blue Xylocarpa violacea. Not only is it enormous, shiny, and vividly coloured, but also noisy and very fast-flying. Until recently, it was just an occasional vagrant from southern Europe, but is now making more appearances, even in my own garden in central London. Finally, as if identifying different bees in the field wasn't difficult enough, there are the cuckoo or homeless bees. These are parasitic and, like a cuckoo, lay their eggs in the nests of other bees. Here they hatch and not only eat the food store, but occasionally the occupants and even kill the queen. The difficulty in identifying them is that they often visually mimic their hosts, although you sometimes do see them near bee nests acting suspiciously, waiting for a chance to nip in and lay an egg. As a general rule, they are often darker, less hairy, and more shiny than their host, although some are very wasp-like, for example, nomad species. All of them possess no baskets, obviously, as they have no need for them.